there were hundreds that had dealt with the past as we consider the past. He said, don't worry about those because they'll only be interesting to people who are interested in history. Focus on the next 20 years. And this was from the 80s when we were doing this. But in those, there was tremendous amount of things that have already come true. He even named Pasteur in one of the quatrains by name. And the famous Hister quatrains. There were many of those, but I even found out more quatrains dealing with Hitler besides just that one. He had all the phases of all the wars from his time to ours, and he had many, many inventions, which he called by the names of metal beasts and, fish, like submarines, like metal fish, because he didn't know what else to call them. He predicted air flight. He was very definite about a lot of these things. And he had many predicting the atomic bomb that have never been interpreted till now. One that I thought was interesting was where he talked about the stone in the tree. The stone being the bomb, and the tree, how we always think of the bomb as represented by a mushroom cloud. To him, it looked like a tree. And in the quatrain, he talked about the stone in the tree as the explosion of the atomic bomb. But not only did he talk about wars and inventions, he talked about every philosophical trend that man would go through. These are all very important to him. So there were many, many that have already occurred. And since I began working with him, and the books were first published in 1989, so it's on record, before the Gulf War began, he gave us the dates for the beginning of the Gulf War 3 times. And he talked about Saddam Hussein in anagram form before the Gulf War ever started. And parts of this have not come true yet, so we know we're not finished with Saddam Hussein or the wars in the Middle East. But many of the events in the last few years have been documented before they occurred. We were given the ones for the fall of the Berlin Wall. We had 3 quatrains that were explained to us before the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was very definite about the wall in the East will fall. And we were told about the breakup of the communist countries, that they would pull away from Russia, some peacefully and some violently, to where Russia would be reduced to the original size of Russia and Siberia. And all these things have come true since my work began with him. So there are many, many of these have come true. And as we're now going into the 4th printing of Volume 1, so much has happened that I've added an addendum, 50-page addendum to the back of the book of events that have just come true in the last year alone. And it's really amazing. And a lot of it has to do with computers, World Wide Web. These were very definitely predicted. He didn't call it World Wide Web, but he talked about the world being hooked together with wires all over the world dealing with computers. And a lot of these predictions are very frightening because they are coming true. And I thought maybe in 100 years, but now in less than 10 years, the things he saw about computers and experimental weaponry are happening in our lifetime. So it is now. It's right up to the minute. Nostradamus said, if we can just get through the decade of the 90s, we'll be okay. See, he saw this horrible war that he referred to as the Third World War. And there were many, many predictions dealing with the third Antichrist that he saw that would be the instigator of the Third World War. And he said, if you can just get through the 90s, he called this the time of troubles. Just get through this without going into this war. Keep it on the lesser scenario, the less violent scenario, will be fine. Because after the year 2000, we're going to be going into wonders you cannot even believe. But he saw the possibility of a terrible war that would be not only atomic, but biological weapons, chemical weapons, germ warfare, the most horrible things you could imagine that he verified for us. And some of these things I thought, well, it sounds like science fiction. But he said, no, it's already invented, and your scientists are working on them. But I let that go until I began to get letters and phone calls from people saying, it's not fiction, I know because we're working on these things. So we're sitting right now at a very volatile time. We could go into this most horrible war, or we could stay like we are. But if we can get through the 90s, then we will go into the 1,000 years of peace after we're into the year 2000. Because he saw a figure coming along at that time that he called the Great Genius. Now, if the Antichrist is the epitome of evil, of everything that is terrible, He said this great genius would be the total opposite, because he said the pendulum cannot swing all the way to the very evil man and stay there. It must swing back to balance. And when it does, it comes into the time of the great genius. And he will have such wondrous inventions. We will be living in space, traveling in space, having space colonies. The human body will be perfected to the point that it will never die, and will be in the 1,000 years of peace. So this is the time I like to focus on, rather than the terrible things he saw. He said he wanted us to know there was a wonderful future ahead of us. We can just get through the end of the 90s. He said there will be more things happening in the 90s, more significant events than have ever happened in the history of the world before. And I like to say it reminds you of the old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. But he believed that we chose to live here at this time, because he said by living now, you could work off as much karma in one lifetime as it would normally take 10 lifetimes to do. This is why we have so much happening all the time, so much coming at us from all directions. We're trying to work off a great deal of karma at this time. But he said you chose to be here, and it can really be very good for the people if they will stick with it and do it. But the great genius, that is part of what's going in the addendum. The internet has been very helpful with this, because Nostradamus saw the next wave of computers. The first one was going to be would operate by voice, which they're working on now. The next ones would be by thought. And I've heard that this is being worked on. But during the time of the great genius, there would be an organic computer, and that it would be able to duplicate human parts, duplicate human bodies. And he saw the great genius as transferring his intellect into this computer, so it would be there to guide us through the 1,000 years of peace. We'll also be running all the power that will power the world and the space stations. But on the internet, I found out that they are working now on computers based on DNA. That they say it will be 1,000,000 times faster and more accurate than anything we have now, because of the way that the DNA transfers information. This is how they will be able to transfer information using the same thing, because they've gone as small as they can go with chips. The next step is cellular. So they said everything is going to go down to the tiny, tiny level of cells. And this is all in the field called nanotechnology. Nano meaning very, very tiny. And it's amazing because we were given this information 10 years ago, and it's happening now. It's all coming about. That he said that the great genius would transfer his knowledge into this. They say this is very possible because all it is energy. And it'd be very possible within the next several decades anyway.